I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Casey White. I'll be moderating our webinar. And the first thing that we wanted to do is just get through a few little housekeeping items. So we just want to make sure we will be stopping throughout the presentation to answer questions. So if you do have any questions, there are two ways you can let us know that something's on your mind. Number one, you can type right into your question box there as an attendee, and we'll answer those directly or pause and ask the presenters. Also, you can raise your hand. So there's a little hand function on your operating keyboard there that you have with GoToWebinar. So go ahead and raise your hand. Either way, we'll get back to you and address your question. So with that said, I'd like to introduce the presenters that we have today. With us today, we have Jim Bitterly, who is the Managing Partner of EDSI Consulting, and also Karen Knudsen, who is the Director of Sales with EDSI Consulting. So I know I'm excited to hear what Jim and Karen have to say about knowledge retention. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Karen, who's going to get us started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you for getting on the phone today to listen to our webinar. To start off, we're looking at the state of affairs in the workforce today. And as you can see, starting in the year 2011, the first baby boomers turned 65. And since then, today and every day, 10,000 of them will reach the age of 65. That's quite a lot. What does that mean for our workforce? Many companies across all industries will face an aging workforce and lose significant number of employees to retirement. In our conversation with our clients and industry partners, every single one of them we talk to in every single industry we have worked with has voiced this concern. We've heard as many as 10% to 75% of their workforce are eligible for retirement within the next 5 years. The majority of the concern or alarm is due to the possibility of losing highly knowledgeable and skilled employees that are involved in critical functions within the organization. How do you replace that one person who knows the ins and outs, who knows everything about that job position? How does that work? How is that work going to get done? It may seem like it might take 3 people to replace that one person. No doubt this is a significant worry, since this can directly affect productivity, production, and ultimately the profits and success of the company. These long-term employees are also most often important team leaders, especially to the younger, newer employees. This loss of experience and expertise can be felt throughout the entire company. If you and your company are kind of finding that you're in the same position with the same concerns, you are obviously certainly not alone. And yes, there is good news. There are ways to take actions and make this transition seamless and successful. Within the next portion of our presentation that Jim will be discussing, he will be identifying ways to identify skills and knowledge of your workforce and put actions into place to ensure that this is a smooth and effective transition for your organization's future success. A little background about EDSI. We are a workforce development and customized training and consulting company headquartered in Michigan. We partner with companies and organizations nationwide and across many different industries. Though we try not to toot our own horn too loudly, I feel very privileged to work for a company that has been recognized with the awards and accolades that we have. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jim, and he's going to take us through the bulk of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the intro. This is an issue that many companies are wrestling with for all the reasons that you talked about, Karen. And what we want to do today is just talk about sort of a proven process that we've seen companies use to manage really kind of the knowledge loss that's occurring due to retirements. Talk about some of the benefits and outcomes of that process, and also talk about some approaches that are being used around the country. This is not a sales pitch, but we do have a tool that we use that we'll talk about a little bit, simply because it really helps, I believe, companies efficiently manage through this process. So first of all, let's just talk about, why is a good knowledge retention strategy important? Well, the reality is there's three primary things that get impacted or that are impacted when older workers retire. What we tend to see is costs for the company go up, costs because overtime goes up, sort of urgent recruiting goes up, quality issues begin to crop up, et cetera. We also see that risks can go up dramatically as people are going away because knowledge is lost, process knowledge, customer knowledge, et cetera. And we generally see a lot of organizational disruptions. So when you have a good knowledge retention strategy in place, what you find is you're able to reduce costs or minimize costs, reduce risks, and reduce organizational disruptions. We look at this process at a very, very high level. On the right-hand side is 4 major steps, which is identify where your risks are and what knowledge will be lost. Then we want to try to capture that information to make sure that it is not lost when older workers retire. Then we want to communicate it. We want to communicate it both in written format, in verbal formats, video formats, et cetera, to make sure that we've captured it, that we communicate it, but also that that information, that the process of knowledge retention is being communicated throughout the organization so that everybody is really on the same page and shares knowledge retention strategy, direction, et cetera. And then we want to connect all of the right pieces together to make sure that those individuals that are leaving and those individuals that are replacing them, that there's a transfer of knowledge that makes sense in the process. So what we typically see, different companies have different issues. In some cases, the company may just have 1 or 2 critical individuals that are near departure, and when they leave, it's going to have a very significant impact either on a department or on the whole company. In other situations, there may be many individuals in various departments that are leaving. For example, we've seen many companies where their skilled trades individuals are leaving, and they don't have really apprenticeship programs in place, training programs in place, and they don't have a succession plan, and they're finding great difficulty in managing basic operations because skilled trades personnel are disappearing.
Hey, Jim,
yes.
I'm going to jump in here real quick. I think this is a great opportunity to ask for a little bit of audience participation. So what we're going to do, just take 20 seconds, and if you guys could just utilize your questions function you have in there. If you can just type right into that questions box, which one of these 3 situations best describes your organization? Whether you're anticipating losing a few individuals, many individuals or departments, or if maybe you don't even know and you think you might have a full organizational issue at hand as it relates to knowledge retention. So we're just going to give it 15 or 20 seconds, and I see some are actually already starting to come in. So just curious. I think that might give you, Jim, a little bit more perspective as we go through.
Thank you, Casey.
I see it looks like, as we're transitioning over here, we've got about 25% of people who look like they understand that it's one key individual or a few individuals, and the rest seem to be split between organization-wide and then kind of department-wide.
Okay, great. That's good to know. So the process at a high level, let me talk about, there's kind of 8 basic pieces, and I'm going to go into these in a little more detail. And you can really kind of follow this as a roadmap to manage knowledge loss in your company. The first is starting with an organizational review to really try to figure out, where does the issue exist, how urgent is it, and making sure that you really get everybody, especially at the management level and the executive level, on board with the level of priority that the initiative has. And then what we do is we typically see that the companies that do this really well follow this process. They start with something called a job task analysis, which I'm going to explain in great detail, which is really getting to the skills related to a job. Then they do a knowledge loss risk assessment interview, and that's related to the knowledge. So one is skills, one is knowledge related. And then they'll develop skill surveys and then conduct surveys to figure out what individuals that aren't retiring in the near future are best suited or a best fit to go into the positions that are about to be vacated. Once you do the surveys, you analyze the data, you review the findings, you create an organizational risk mitigation plan, and then you implement that plan. So what does that all mean? So the first one is performing a job task analysis. The job task analysis is all about skills. It's taking a job and breaking it down into specific responsibilities, tasks, and then competency levels that are required for each one of those tasks. And it really helps you break down an individual's job or a job classification if you have multiple people that are going to be departing in that job class. The second thing is to do what we call a KLRA interview, or a knowledge loss risk assessment interview. That interview gets to the knowledge that person has. So the JTA is about skills. The KLRA, or the knowledge loss risk assessment, is all about knowledge. So if I am let me give you an example. A person works in a water department, and this is a maintenance technician who makes sure that the master valves going into a certain community are operational. If one of those valves breaks, the job task analysis is going to tell you how to fix it. The knowledge loss risk assessment is going to tell you more than just how it's fixed. It's going to tell you, okay, when that happens, where did that technician go to get the part? And what happens if it's an emergency? Is there a vendor that they can get parts from very, very quickly? Is there a storage of those parts somewhere in a warehouse that they can access? And then who are the team members that they normally call on? So the knowledge loss risk assessment takes you to a much deeper level of information that helps transition that knowledge very quickly so that the replacement technician doesn't have to learn the hard way through the process. The next step is developing a skills survey to figure out who has the basic skills to do that job when that individual retires. Now, you're seeing what we use. That's the format that we use in our SkillDeck software, but you can do this in Excel. I've even seen people do this, in pen and paper, which is crazy, but there's a lot of different ways you can do this. We just like to use our own software because it makes it really fast and efficient. But you break down the job task analysis into specific pieces, and then you survey individuals against that that might be good replacement individuals for that job. And we typically like people to look at it on a scale from NA all the way up to 4. And really what's important is the numerical scale, 0 to 4. At 0, I've never heard of a task. All the way up to 4 is I know it so well that I could teach it to other individuals. So you can assess individuals and figure out where they lie relative to that position that's going to disappear, and you can see where they have skill gaps as well. So you conduct the skill surveys, and then you analyze the data. And again, here, this is how we do it, and that is just using SkillDeck, and that is for an individual, you can see the rating that's for the individual. You can see the benchmark rating, which is the level of capability that they need to have, and you can see that individual skill gaps in green and red. And in some cases, we use yellow as well. But wherever there's red that you see on your screen, that means there's a skill gap. So in light of that, what you can do is you could look at 5, 10, 15, or hundreds, if need be, of potential replacements for that individual to see who has the least amount of skill gaps and who would be the quickest fit, and then specifically what training they would require. The next is creating the organizational risk mitigation plan. And that is really the overall plan for all the positions that need to be replaced. and it looks at training priorities at the individual level, department level, organizational level. It looks at critical personnel, prioritizing them as to, what are the top 3 or 5 or 10 positions that need to be dealt with immediately. It also looks at what's the recruiting and hiring plan that you need to have to make sure that you are going to fill those positions efficiently and quickly. And then retention plan, which the retention plans are becoming more and more important, where you have very critical older workers where it's going to be very difficult to replace them quickly. So the retention plan is really all about, are there certain things we can do to create flexibility to maybe keep that person in the workforce longer or available to your company on a longer basis? Incidentally, we were just at a conference, the SHRM conference in Chicago, and the experts that talked about retention all talked about flexibility. They said that there was no single tool that worked. In fact, one of the companies was Chevron, and they have a really unique, what they call a retention toolbox. And there are like 20 different tools that are in that toolbox. And the individual that was presenting commented that, look, there's no single tool that works for everybody. In fact, there's not a dominant tool. But what it is there's usually 1 or 2 that will work for one individual. And at the end of the day, to sum it up, it was all about flexibility. And there was a panel of retention experts, and they all agreed that creating flexibility for the departing worker was the #1 thing that you have to do in terms of a retention plan. So the last key step is implementing that risk mitigation plan. And that, that's going to take time, effort, but it will save you money, it will save organizational disruption, and it'll minimize your risks. Lots of outcomes and benefits. I think the biggest things are that you do, from an HR perspective, your life becomes less chaotic. Instead of reacting to what's going on, you're being proactive, and you're actually kind of taking the situation to your own hands and managing through it. And because you're doing that, you actually become significantly more important to the operational folks in your organization.
Jim, I want to jump in again. If you wouldn't mind, we had a great question that came in, and that was really about timing. So you took us through that process there, and I know you'll dive into some other steps. But what type of a timing does an organization need to set aside to go through that process?
Casey, that is a really good question, and it varies significantly by the situation. So an example would be, we're working with a large utility company in the state of Missouri. They have one very specific position that they're very concerned about. And that process from A to Z is less than 2 months. So because we know who it is, we don't have to analyze. We did the JTAs, we did the knowledge loss risk assessment, and now we've got a risk mitigation plan in place, and that's being implemented. But in some bigger organizations, where there may be many positions, and in some cases they don't even know who is at risk, then it can take quite a bit longer, because you want to really assess all of the departments, all the key roles, and really identify where your priorities lie. And sometimes that can be just a couple-month process right there, just figuring that out. But we tell people, it's a process that can be 2 to 6 to 8 months long, typically.
Great, thanks.
So here's an example. There's a lot of good examples out. Tennessee Valley Authority was one of the early adapters of good knowledge retention strategy, and they used a tool that we thought was really valuable. And that tool was coming up with kind of a total attrition factor, and it was really the retirement factor times the position risk factor equals the total attrition factor. And it was really simple. The retirement factor was all related to when the individual was going to retire. So they'd put a number to that, and you can see the scale on your screen, 5 being somebody that's going to retire either this year or the next fiscal year in your business, all the way down to 1. Then there's a risk factor, a position risk factor, which is all related to the difficulty or level of effort required to replace the position. So if it takes 3 to 5 years to replace that person or to get somebody skilled to replace that person, that's a very, very high risk factor, and that's a 5, all the way down to 1, which requires little additional training. You multiply the two together and you get your attrition factor, and so you have a very nice numerical way to assign priorities in terms of where do we need to spend our time and energy to make sure that we're focusing on the high priority individuals. And typically what we say is any positions that you have that are 20 to 25, the high priority section, they need to go immediately into your risk mitigation planning phase. So, we have a tool called SkillDex. Again, this is not meant to be a sales pitch. You can do it the old-fashioned way on a whiteboard. A lot of people use Excel. We've used Excel before. We just found that with bigger organizations, it became really cumbersome and really inefficient. So we use SkillDex, and it's basically a strategic workforce planning tool. And you can see on this page, this is just a very small segment of a JTA where you can see a couple of responsibilities: maintaining facilities, managing human resources, and then the tasks are all those items below it. And so you can actually put that into your SkillDex database by job. You can determine what is your target level of competency on that 0 to 4 scale. And then you can actually do surveys based on that to see who else matches that position. But you're also, I guess behind the scenes, you're creating a job description that's very skill and task oriented that can be used for any new hires and to even see what their immediate skill gaps may be. So it's just a wonderful tool, and you can see on this example where skill gaps exist for an individual and where they're going to need very specific training, so you can target your training efforts and your training dollars, which everybody has a limited amount of training dollars, so stretching them as far as you can is always extremely valuable. So with that, I'll turn it back to Karen, and she can take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Jim. That was some really great information. And to keep on the SkillDex topic, what you're looking at right here is this process that Jim just referred to with the survey, et cetera, and the skills balance sheet can be applied not only to the individual, but to a team, to a department, or even a whole company. And that gives you it creates a skills balance sheet for one, but it also gives you that high-level overview and that organizational snapshot of your workforce. We can also layer in retirement dates to this information, and this also just gives you presents the skills of your workforce and what skills are going to be lost over time. So as we go through, say, like a year 1, a year 2, year 3, 4, and 5, you can see how quickly everything can turn to red. But if you do handle this and you do proactively have a plan, an action plan, and a risk mitigation plan, this doesn't need to happen. This can actually stay green and continue to be full of green as your plan continues. So whatever plan you do choose, whatever approach you do choose for your company, the sooner the plan is set into place, the sooner everything gets going, the more successful and smooth the transition will be for your company and your workforce. Here are just a few of the companies that we have worked with and had the pleasure of working with in the past. They share the same concerns, the same challenges with their workforce, their aging workforce, and it was a pleasure to partner with them. There's many more companies that we have worked with that are located on our website, all different sizes, all different industries, and that we've worked with proactively creating a risk mitigation plan for their aging workforce. Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Casey.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here because we do have a few additional questions that have come in. So I think this is a great time. First of all, thank you to both Karen and Jim for your time today. We won't let you off the hook yet because we need you to answer these questions for us. And again, if there are additional questions, just keep typing them into the questions box here, and we'll make sure that we do our best to answer them. So, you know, Jim, I think I might defer to you on this question as well. Karen, you just touched on it, but the question is really about whether or not this process can apply to companies of all sizes. Is it geared towards large companies, small companies, mid-sized companies? What would you respond to that?
Yeah, the process really can be used for all companies. What we typically find, though, is smaller companies generally know where the risk is. So the process is faster, obviously, because they know where their priorities lie. And for bigger companies, oftentimes, for example, there's a large refinery in northwest Ohio. They have literally thousands of employees, and they don't know exactly where their issue lies because they have a lot of different employees, a lot of different job categories, and they simply don't know. So for them, they have to go through that assessment phase up front to figure out where are the primary risks that need to be dealt with immediately. So yes, it applies to small, medium, and large companies.
Great. And the next question is really about backfilling talent. So they said, you know, when we start to see these retirements, we're going to have a number of individuals to backfill. How would this information help us to backfill those positions?
Well, yeah, if you've got to backfill the positions, there's a couple of things. First of all, what you want to do is when you do that survey phase, you're trying to identify the people that are already the closest fit, so you're trying to move them into the new roles. The problem is their roles then become vacated. But you know this ahead of time, so you can actually create really kind of a recruitment strategy. And one of the beautiful things that we find, like with SkillDex, for example, is when we create those job task analysis, we can actually create a survey, and we can create a link for your website. So if you're hiring to fill a position, you can put that link on your website. The applicant will fill out that, they'll take the skills survey for that particular job. So if you have maybe 100 applicants for that job, you can sort it where you get maybe the 5 best applicants that are the closest skills match. And day one, when you hire one or more of those people, for every individual, you actually have a custom training outline in terms of the skill gaps that they already have.
Great. I think that I don't see any additional questions that haven't come in that we haven't addressed. So I guess it's just time to say goodbye, and thank you both for your time. So Jim and Karen, I know I'm grateful for you guys to join us, share information with us. Also, I know that Jim or Karen, we have their email addresses up here. If you have any additional questions, or if there's any way that you think that Jim, Karen, or EDSI could help as you kind of take on these knowledge retention strategies, I know I speak on their behalf to say they'd be absolutely willing to help with that process. So,
thank you, Casey.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Karen, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Casey and Jim.
So thank you so much for joining, and we hope you learned a lot and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Have a great day.